Hello, I'm Chris Beecham, managing editor of Gold Derby here with Laurent Bouzereau, director and producer of Music by John Williams, a new documentary for Disney Plus. I would like to know, first of all, I know you've done a lot of work for Steven Spielberg over the years and some of the other directors that you featured. What, how did that help you to get ready for this project working on John Williams?
Well, my education of in cinema started in the 70s with my obsession with John Williams and Stevens movies. So one could say that I've been preparing for this my entire life. And it's so wonderful, to get a chance, and what an honor to be the one who gets to tell the story, because I'm not the first one to approach John. And he said no many times, even to myself. But when he turned 90 with Steven, we really cornered him and said it was time to really tell his story. And so I'm so thrilled that I got to do it, because again, from a personal standpoint, his music has been the soundtrack of my life, literally. But on a less self-absorbed angle, I really feel that John has made a gigantic contribution to the world of music at large, beginning with making film music legitimate, but also his concert work. And to me, he really is the Beethoven, the Mozart of our times.
Why do you think he said yes? What was the comfort level there between you and him?
Well, I've known him a long time. I've known Stephen a long time. And he said to me something at one point. He said, Laurent, I don't think people care about my life and they don't care about who I am. I said, well, John, I don't think that's true, but I'm going to reassure you and tell you that it's actually not about you. It's about music, and it's about musicians, and it's about that, what you do for a living. And that, I think, convinced him, was the fact that this was going to be a tribute to an art form, and to people who collaborate with him in it. And that's very different from me coming at it saying something like, well, people want to know everything about your life, or something to that extent. So I think coming at him from, you know, not trying to be manipulative, but knowing that he's all about music. I really came on all the subjects we talked about through music.
Did he want anything off limits?
No, 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 no. He was extremely generous, and it was so relaxed. I had permission to laugh, and at times I cried, and it was very surprising that, being the first member of the audience of my own films, I get extremely emotional, and the second I get emotional, I know I'm onto something. And there was a discussion we had, and I literally I was crying, as was my crew, by the way. And I apologized to John. I said, John, I'm just so sorry. I don't mean to be getting emotional here. He's like, no, emotions are wonderful. It's beautiful that you're responding. I love that. So, it was very relaxed. As you can see, he jokes around. He tells me at one point, I love Laurent, but he asked me too many questions, in the film. So it was really fun. I'll cherish the experience forever.
I was at that event that you featured a few clips from with him and Steven Spielberg over at I think it was at the Writers Guild, that particular event where they it was either two I think it was 2 years ago when they discussed their collaboration over the
Oh
years.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
had some clips from that. That was
yeah.
an amazing event, and I had never heard him other than in clips, from interviews over the years. He tells such great stories and is so funny. And I never knew that about him in all the years that I've enjoyed his work.
No, and I'll tell you something. One of the things that surprised me the most in talking to Yo-Yo Ma and Itzhak Perlman and others, other collaborators, is their sense of humor. When it's time to work, they're extremely serious. But outside the work, they're extremely funny, and they joke around, and I had never been part of that kind of exchange, and to see them together, to see him with Gustavo, for example, Dudamel, was was so fun. I mean, that's the only word I can find to describe it. I thought it was going to be much more rigid of a world, but it's not. It's very relaxed and very accessible. And as I discovered that humor, I was like, the audience is gonna love this. They're gonna laugh. And really, when I saw the film with 1,000 people at the Man Chinese the other night, people were laughing, and I was so happy.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions. You get to debut at the AFI Fest, which is amazing.
I
What
know.
kind of reactions did you get following?
Well, I'll tell you, that was, well, again, selfishly, it was beyond to have a film that I directed at the Man Chinese and the AFI is fitting on so many level. And something that Stephen said in his speech, was how great is it that you're opening the festival with a documentary, which um, people I've not always seen documentaries as powerful as a scripted film, and they forget that the first images ever filmed were that of a train entering a train station. And when people saw it, they gasped. Well, they've been seeing that train coming into the station. Why they're gasping is because there's a point of view. You're telling a story, even though it's a short documentary, right? So I was really proud of the fact that a documentary was being showcased. But the impact of that screening came the day after. I received an award from the Newport Beach Film Festival, and 2 hours away from LA. And I went there, and they screened the film, and there was a Q&A with myself and Frank Marshall. And three kids came up to me. One of them said, listen, I saw the movie last night at the AFI. I wanted to see it again, and I wanted to tell you that I abandoned the piano a few years ago, but seeing the film makes me want to play the piano again. And then two other kids who are in film schools, came up and said, seeing this, now I want to do documentaries. Well, that made me feel really good, because I'm like, that impact that it has on young people who are the next generation of appreciators of John and Stephen, the next John, the next Stephen, perhaps, is the function of what we do. And the function of a film like this, I would want it to be, people ask me, who do you make those films for? Well, I make them for people like you and I who love film and who love music, but I make it for someone who's not born yet. In 50 years from now, I want that person to see the film and say, I want to be a musician.
Well, not only do we hear his music throughout your documentary, but because so many of his productions have been these big blockbuster kind of productions, documentaries were done or behind the scenes interactions were done that you now had access to. How important was that in telling your story?
Well, I mean, to know that you have illustrations. So we shot a lot of new footage because I wanted to anchor the film in the present, right? So being backstage with John at the Hollywood Bowl, or in San Francisco, or in Tanglewood, I mean, all of that was happening as we were making the film. And that was part of me entering his world in a very unique and different way. But true, to find the scoring session of Star Wars and E.T. and Jaws and Steven Super 8. I mean, all that I knew existed, but to be able to put it into the context of a discussion about John elevates that footage and makes it even more powerful. So yeah, thanks to Stephen and George Lucas, cameras have been witnessed to John's, remarkable musical world on the scoring stages, but also his relationship with musicians. Seeing David Newman, who was in the orchestra of E.T., talk about specific, the harpist or the piano player at the scoring session of E.T. is really giving the musicians their due, and putting a spotlight on an incredible cast that John assembles for each of his scores.
You've mentioned a couple of names, and I want to make sure anybody that wants to watch this documentary knows that you not only have Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Ron Howard, Chris Columbus, a lot of his directors on camera, but a lot of them helped you, push this forward and helped you produce it or behind the scenes. What was it? Why was that important to you to have all of them involved?
Well, I mean, they're all people who've had an impact on John's career or who have been impacted by John. And all those people I discussed with John, I discussed with Stephen, and we wanted to cast the film in a way that would be reflective of the different generations of filmmakers that have been working with him, or the different generations of musicians that have worked with him, to really show. I mean, that young woman who is playing the French horn, or Tom who is playing the trumpet. I mean, those are golden moments, that to think of those young people who are just entering the world of music, have been, influenced and inspired by John's music, is really the function of what the story is all about.
What was something surprising that you uncovered, either something from clips that you found from the past or even from current interviews?
Well, I would say, again, as I said, the humor that exists, and the sort of, I want to say, the incredible brotherhood that Stephen and John have, particularly, when Stephen is always filming. So, John saying, it's like being in the shower and somebody's filming you, it's a little window into how private that concept of creating is like, for him. Even though he's making a joke about it, he's making a point. So I think all those moments are very rewarding, and I challenge anyone to watch the film several times, because there's a lot of subtext to everything. I'm very much of a believer in less is more, and you may just get a word or a reaction, but you can read into those reaction on the second viewing. And I think that historical archival footage is extremely revealing at times of John's process and tenacity and talent.
And I've told Steven Spielberg this before too. I just think John Williams is the best composer I've ever encountered. You mentioned, going back to Beethoven and Mozart and all of those kind of people. But among 20th century composers, where do you think he stacks up? I mean, going back to Gershwin all the way through, McCartney, Lennon's and Paul Simons and all of those kind of people. Where do you think he stacks up?
Oh, I think he's number one. And that's,
I'm in
there's,
agreement with you. I don't know of anybody who's impacted my life more as a composer.
yeah. I really think that uh, in years to come, people will be, my argument is this, that there are very few people. If you look at the 70s and the late 60s, which is when he really came into himself and thrived with Jaws and Star Wars, etc. Look at the filmmakers of that era, or look at the actors of that era, and ask young people, uh, um, who has survived the test of time. Well, Stephen luckily has, and George Lucas and Scorsese and John Williams, but a lot of people that you and I admired back in the 70s, who were huge stars. No one knows who they are today. So it's a tribute to John to have reinvented himself, yet staying really faithful to his belief that orchestral music is the way that it should be done. But he has attracted the new filmmakers. So you have my generation growing up with Star Wars, but then you have the next generation growing up with Jurassic Park, and then you have the generation growing up with Harry Potter, and then you have the generation growing up with the new Star Wars films. I mean, you're looking at four different generations of people appreciating art, being inspired by it, becoming musicians or filmmakers, thanks to John Williams. I don't know anybody else who can claim that.
Yes, I agree. Well, final question for you. He's been nominated at the Oscars over 50 times. You have not gotten an Oscar nomination yet, although you've had some amazing documentaries. What would it be like for you if John Williams is the one that brings you to the Oscars in a few months?
Oh my God. Okay, well, it would just be, it wouldn't be a dream, it'd be the dream.
Is
Um,
that something that you've thought about before? I mean, do you follow the documentary races at the Oscars from year to year?
I have to be totally honest, I don't, because I think if you work in order to be, rewarded that way, you set yourself up for huge disappointment. I'm very much of the school of I'm making another film right now. I'm selling another one. I'm very much on to the next thing, and if a reward of that magnitude happens, I'll embrace it, but I don't make it a goal. It sounds falsely, modest, but I'm thrilled if the film is well received, and if there's anything beyond that, then that will be amazing. But I don't ever set that as a goal.
Well, listen, I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody gets a chance to see it in a big screen on a theater, but if not, it's just about to start streaming on Disney Plus. And I really appreciate your time and the great work you did on this documentary.
Thank you so much.